We're seated at the Gate of Horn. This is Sunday early evening, empty and yet not empty. There are some people seated here, friends, acquaintances of our guest. Perhaps we're his guest too, Dudley Moore, one of the... How can you describe Dudley Moore? Certainly those who have heard the recordings of Beyond the Fringe, or those who have seen Beyond the Fringe in New York, perhaps some have in London, will recognize the name and the talent. One of the four, witty is a much overused word, yet so applicable here, who takes off on the foibles of so much that bugs us today. And Dudley also, this is a coincidence I find a very happy one, was the composer of the soundtrack of a film made by Dennis Mitchell, but the hero of that film has not seen it. The hero of the film is Chicago, and it was a marvelous soundtrack for those of us who had the good fortune of hearing it as well as seeing it. Where do we begin with Dudley Moore at the piano? I think at the piano might be, you're seated here, you and music.
No, I'd never know how to begin, you know, I wouldn't, it's a sort of question, people say when they ask, what sort of composer are you? I just don't know, you know, I don't know what idiom I'd say I compose in, or exactly what I would call myself, you know, in any particular way. It's very difficult for me to start playing, in other words, and say, well, this is me, or that isn't. I'd have to sort of say, well, this is maybe a bit of what I like doing, you know, this minute.
Yeah.
You know what
that might be perhaps a better way, just this which you like to do this minute, and perhaps if we use this approach, as we go along, we'll find out more and more of Dudley Moore, the man and the artist. What this minute, say, would you like to do? It's rather cold outside. We're here among friendly people at the gate. Or just talk. Would you rather talk for the moment while we warm up a little?
I know what I'd like to do is I'd like to play a version of I Thought About You. It's just a little sort of Bachian prelude I did on the tune, which I just feel like playing. I haven't played the piano for, well, it's a day now. So, and I must say I didn't get the chance to relax apart from the show, so that's what I'd like to do.
A bit of Bachiana for relaxation. You do this often, by the way?
Well, I've always had an interest in Bach and doing, I mean, this is where the whole business of parody or satire comes in, you know, copying styles and doing jazz themes in contrapuntal style and so forth. Although the other way around, I think it's a bit more difficult, you know, doing classical themes in jazz style, because it does tend to be a bit vulgar, because unless you're very careful, it just sounds cheapened rather than enhanced, you know.
This point you raise, I'm sure, is one that is often made by musicians, composers, taking a work, a classic, a masterpiece, and jazzifying, if I use the phrase. This is you see an inherent danger.
Yeah, I think this is a very dangerous practice. Also, I mean, in jazz now there's a trend towards trying to make it respectable and rather more learned, you know, in a self-conscious way. People come onto a music stand with their musicianship badges on their lapels, you know, saying, I'm going to play music that has some intellectual worth, you know, whereas it should be rather inbred in the music than just merely superimposed. The whole business about jazz is that it starts from a point which one doesn't reach until after some years in a normal classical training. You use exotic chords and harmonies, and you learn them by numbers, you know, D13s with the flat and fifth and all this sort of thing. But you miss out a whole massive chunk of musicianship, which they then, after they've got the chords at their fingertips, try and pull in rather awkwardly into their music.
I think we should point out, Dada, to the audience that you led a jazz group for quite a while, didn't you, at the Establishment in London?
Yes.
Where Second City, where we had this exchange.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, now, what is the nature of the jazz that you played there?
Well, I'm, I suppose, basically more interested in the cultivation of a beat more than anything. And I don't. It sounds pretty basic, but it's far too often ignored in jazz today. People are so concerned with, as I say, making jazz more erudite, if you like. That
Self-consciously so.
That they forget about the actual presence of the beat. You know, they have something going. They have the top cymbal of the drums going and the bass walking along, and then they forget that the beat has to be cultured and nourished. And this is what I'm mainly interested in at the moment. And I feel that the musicianship should somehow creep in unobserved, you know, and should be there anyway, and not have to make this rather stylized entry.
Well, as you're saying this, and we're seated here, do you feel like, at this moment, feel like playing a little jazz?
No, the awful thing is that it's very difficult to illustrate what I'm talking about without a bass player and a drummer to give the beat. But there's one comparison that I could make. I mean, for me, the main pianists today are Oscar Peterson and Errol Garner, despite the fact that there's a great tribe of very interesting, subtle pianists around. I find that Peterson and Garner are the two pianists most aware of the importance of a beat. I mean, Errol Garner, in his way, sort of pulls the beat around, and no other pianist does this. You know, he sets up this, but Peterson deals with it another way. You know, he eliminates this guitar-like left hand, and he leaves it to the bass and drums to give this beat. But it's not just the bass and drums who make the beat ride. It's the way he times his playing round the notes. He pushes the beat up, you know, by sort of jabbing it on each side. He somehow makes it froth a bit. And there is a moment which is communicated to any audience, and certainly to the musicians, when you just feel that you can do nothing wrong, and suddenly the beat really takes off. About, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago, a drummer started playing with me, a Greek-Australian drummer who came to England. And the first night he played with me was extraordinary. You know, I'd never played with a drummer like this who set up the beat so beautifully for me to knock it down. And we had a tremendous time for about 3 months. And then suddenly we lost it, and we couldn't get it again. And our playing was becoming very stilted. And then gradually it came back. I was trying to bring it back by artificial means, by trying to think technically of how I was doing it. But it was very difficult. And I was only approaching it slightly again. It's a sort of an instinctive thing, and you've got to be relaxed. You've got to force yourself to relax, you know, if that's possible.
Force yourself to relax.
Yeah. And unless you can, unless you come onto the piano with a basic lack of inhibition, but you're in control at the same time, which is a bit of a paradox, you can't achieve this beat. You know, it's a beat that's pushing forward aggressively all the time, and is very heavy, but is also leaning back and is very light at the same time. It's this combination.
Would you say there's tension, relaxation, sort of a combination of both?
I think so. And I think this isn't very present in much jazz today. Even in the cool school, they don't really sort of achieve this beat as often as it should be achieved. You know, they don't get this ride. Mainly, I think, because they don't really feel it. They don't set it up enough. You know.
Is this the point you made earlier seems to be connected with this, that self-consciousness that's setting in? This is art, capital A, or this is music I am playing, and the result of the self-consciousness, this relaxation you talked about earlier, may not be there.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's almost a substitution for the rather more difficult process of making a beat ride, you know.
When I asked earlier, this was a marvelous takeoff on Errol Garner earlier, and I think this proves a point that several people said about you. Why you're such an excellent mimic, that is musical mimic, as well as verbally, is that your basis, you're so well grounded. We open with Bach, you do a bit of Garner. I think we should know something about Dudley Moore himself, beginnings and music. You were born on Primrose Day, we're told,
Yes.
and you presented to your mother as a hot cross bun.
Yes.
How did she take to it?
I think she was half surprised, half delighted, half appalled. That makes one and a half. Well, I wanted to learn the violin first, but she insisted I did the piano. Good for her. And when I was 11, I did the violin, and when I was about 17, I did the organ. I did about 6 years at the Guildhall School of Music in London, which was a rather useless period, actually, for me. It was 6 years going every week to a music school, but I was learning music under students of music who were not too sure of their own status themselves, so they could hardly be expected to teach us particularly well. But it was useful. But the real opening out came when I went to Oxford. You know, I went up not really knowing how many symphonies Beethoven had written and so forth, and literally knowing very little about certainly the historical aspects of music. And there was a lot to be tapped, you know, at that time. When I go back to Oxford, I often wonder how I ever stuck it, you know, but I would never have missed the opportunity to have gone there. But the whole feeling for mimicry, I suppose, came up mainly through a devotion to a couple of composers like Bach and well, Bach was really an obsession with me in my early days, and well, it still is, and that made me try and play in the style of Bach. And all the satire I do is purely out of admiration. You know, when I heard Garner the first time, which was when I was 17, although there's a lot of Garner I don't like, especially the ballads, where I think he becomes too sentimental and ornate, which is why I have a complete anathema for Art Tatum, which is another story. Anyway, when I
feel Art Tatum you feel is a bit too flowery?
Yeah, I can't. I really can't take him at all, which is, I know, very offensive to many people. But it's the whole conception, both rhythmic and harmonic. It just doesn't appeal to me. But when I heard Garner, it was the feeling. It's always been feeling in music that's appealed to me, and it was the feeling for the beat that got me straight away. And I spent the next 5 years listening to all his records and just trying to play like him. And he's been the greatest influence on me for about the last, well, from the years when I was 17 to about 25 or something like that.
So it's Bach and Garner.
Bach and Garner, a pretty odd combination, you know.
You must admire Benjamin Britten, too.
Yeah, oh yes.
If we, you know, I'm leading up to something, of course. I think that there's so many hilarious moments in Beyond the Fringe, but certainly one, it's about to say it's a devastating takeoff, yet it's one of endearment, really. You see, you said a moment ago that your takeoff, your satire, is done with admiration.
Yes, well, I've always been a tremendous admirer of Britten's music, you know. I mean, to me, he's the most direct of English composers. Also, Peter Pears, I adore his voice, you know. There's something about the quality of his voice that knocks me over. And the combination of the two, of course, is irresistible. I was talking to somebody just a few moments ago, as a matter of fact, about the peculiar vibrato that Pears has, you know, sort of very wide, leisurely vibrato, which he gets, you know, when he sings. And a slightly constricted sound as well. It's a very delicate noise, you know, halfway between a countertenor. I was going to say an Italian tenor, but it's not that. It's a very sort of gentle noise and a very sensitive, subtle musical approach.
Would it be possible? Was it Peter Cook introduces you with that? Who introduced you? Is that
Jonathan
Miller? It's something about we're now about to hear Dudley Moore, if I remember this right, and it's a performance of Little Miss Muffet wasn't it?
Yes, it's called Little Miss Britain, merely
Little
to
Miss
incorporate
Muffet, yes.
Britain into the
But
title.
Little Miss Muffet, who was the daughter of...
That's right, yes. Who, I can hardly remember it myself after 2 years. He says, the Little Miss Britain referred to in the song is believed to be the daughter of the entomologist of the 17th century entomologist of the same name, which is a rather nice little introduction. But,
May we?
yes. I get a sort of tightening of the chin when I do that. You know, I have to pull my mouth back, and I'm always afraid of getting lockjaw.
Well, Dudley, did Britton and Piers ever hear you do this?
No, as a matter of fact, they haven't. I met them very recently. I did a program of poetry and jazz at the Aldborough Festival in England just before I came away. And, of course, they organised the festival, and I was very surprised that they allowed jazz to be played there. But anyway, I met them afterwards, and as I had hoped, Benjamin Britten was a very charming and warm, sincere person, and Peter Piers was very nice too. I only met him very briefly. But the thing is, I think they've had so many, I don't know, inept takeoffs in reviews before, that they were rather afraid of yet another one. I don't know if they've heard the record.
Are they aware of your takeoff?
Yes, I believe they know about it. A friend of mine knows them better than I do and has been trying to persuade them to come along, but as yet they haven't.
Well, what you've done here, and this fascinates a great many who hear this, particularly musicians. Just as early you were doing the takeoff on Errol Garner. You knew Garner so well. And here you handled Britain, whatever they call the harmonies. It's fantastic. It's Britain.
Well, it's, I don't know, in a way I've been most influenced by Britain of all the English composers, you know, the way, just in a quality, in a sense of quality, that's the only way in which I approach music, you know, unless it has some quality about it, then I can't get interested in it. I don't care, I mean, the musicianship should always be built in, therefore, this extraordinarily direct quality comes right out at me, you know, and I can identify myself with it immediately. Although with the Garner thing, it was more difficult because it's a very, well, it's a difficult thing to play if you've not sort of been born with that particular feeling, you know. But I found more and more it was how I wanted to play for a long time anyway.
Before, I hope that, you know, I know we're imposing upon your art. Really, this is marvelous. But I know Chicagoans will like this very much, as anyone would. But perhaps I might ask about you and jazz, too. You speak of jazz. You work two worlds. You span two worlds. You always have spanned the two worlds, haven't you? Here are you. Now, if I just ask us, you're aware of the self-consciousness that seems to be creeping into jazz, academicians at work, rather than, you mentioned feeling, and yet you yourself span both. You recognize the musicality, too.
Yes. I think, you know, I used to get very worried about the fact that I like jazz and serious music, you know. I used to feel that the two were not reconcilable, but in fact they are, you know, and one can listen to a piece of Oscar Peterson and then turn immediately to the Mozart Requiem. There's nothing wrong with that at all, although I used to think there was. But the trouble is, as you know, jazz is a very young art, and it's sprouted up very violently, and at the moment is going through a very curious stage where it's trying to prove itself to be a status symbol, you know, as well. And there is, of course, the opposite extreme to the very, very musical type of jazz. There's the sort of rhythm and blues type, which I must say I prefer, you know. But again, that's become a bit of a fad, you know. And there's something about the beat that is very limited. There's a sort of, how can I describe it? The beat is played straight, and the jazz is played very much on the beat. It's a very on-the-beat thing, which has a tremendous attraction, but only up to a certain point, and it takes somebody like Oscar Peterson to be able to play around with the beat, you know, to, I don't know, push it from either side, not get quite on the beat, you know, so he would go... I can't really demonstrate it without a bass and drums, you know, but it's beautifully. Sort of, it's a more flexible thing, you know, than the straight rhythm and blues. But as I say, I prefer that infinitely more to the purely musical.
My first knowledge of you came not through Beyond the Fringe, but through the good offices of Barbara Siegel. I think you met Dennis Mitchell,
Yes, through
the
Barbara.
BBC documentarian, and my first knowledge of you was in seeing this film
Yes.
that Chicago has not seen, and being so impressed, didn't know who you were, so the name, music by Dudley Moore. So impressed with the soundtrack. That was a jazz track, as I remember, primarily.
Yes.
Would you mind telling, can you, I know people haven't seen the film, it deals with our city.
That's right, yes. Well, it seemed to me when Dennis Mitchell asked me to do the score that there was only one possible way of doing it, and that was as a jazz score, especially when I saw the film. And, well, the way the impression he'd given of Chicago was a very sort of, almost a funky look at it in a way. And I remember feeling in the first sequence where he panned round a view of the skyline that I'd always wanted to write some, pretty dirty jazz, and this was a good opportunity.
I think I'd never heard this description of the film. It's marvelous. A funky view of Chicago. He should know this. This is a great compliment, really.
Yeah, well,
a funky, if perhaps to explain WFMT listeners, some of whom are not jazz-minded, would infer there's a gutsiness to it.
Yes,
blues
with meat, and I remember being very pressed for time and writing the score in the bulk of the score in a couple of days, where it suddenly, took fire, and the first sequence was very, a very sort of gruff sort of thing, had a little ostinato going on. I can't in any way give the idea.
You're giving us Chicago.
And there were very low trombones and so forth, and it was a good opportunity for me to experiment in that, sort of style or medium.
Fantastically exciting, as I remember. I'm talking now about the visual impression and the sound, both. It matched so well. Funky view of Chicago. We've got to hear some more other people whom you admire. French singers. You like French singers a lot.
Well, I suppose it's really the idea of French song, the slightly... the precious in music really rather amuses me at times, which is what amuses me about Britain. Despite the fact that I absolutely adore what he does, there's a certain amount of preciousness both in his music and in Peter Pear's voice, which is not really a criticism. It's if you like, a really sharpened up sensibility. But you get it in French songs as well, and the 4A song that I do in the show is really a salute to him for this slightly fey pictorialism that he has in his settings.
Would it be possible for us to hear this salute to Foray?
Yes, it's called La nuit s'épanouit dans la vie sanglotante. I've sung it so much, and the vowels get so twisted up when I sing them that I can hardly speak the title properly. Jonathan Miller introduces it as describing, I believe, what is it now? It's so awful, I can't remember my own show. He says, the lover bemoaning the lover on the other side of the bank, or something like that. It's something fairly vague. Anyway, La nuit s'épanouit.
Somehow, Dudley, you evoke the image of the young French tenor at dimly lit bistro and North Shore matrons just listening in trance.
There's so much water in Foray's music, it gets soaked at the end of every song. I don't know why I particularly picked on that. I think at the time it was probably through lack of material. I've often been prompted into writing things just out of panic. And I have a feeling I needed a third. Yes, I'm sure it was that. I needed a fourth solo, and I was desperately thinking of something to take off.
I think we should
musically, rather.
I think we should point out, too, that Dudley Moore's humor is visual as well as for the ear. Your use of your elbow.
Yes.
Use of the piano.
Oh, yes, that was a... well, there's one chord on the piano where you can... Well, it sounds a very exotic chord where you can use all the black notes, which is when I do this sort of glissando. And also with the elbow.
What would you call this gesture? I think we should describe this. I can't find the word.
Well, it's going...
This,
I don't know,
the back of your
sort
fingers.
of
It's sort of a devil-may-care.
Yes, a little sweep up the keyboard, you know. I hadn't thought of it that way. I must incorporate that.
Dudley, Beyond the Fringe with Jonathan Miller, Alan Bennett, Peter Cook, Dudley Moore. Is there a chance of that coming to Chicago?
There's certainly a chance. We don't really know what's happening at the moment. We're doing a year probably in New York because we're booking through to September. After that, it's difficult to say. We might hope to continue on Broadway or take it on tour. I'd like to tour because it would give me an opportunity to see places in America that otherwise I don't think I would have the opportunity to see.
Have you been, while you've been here, have you been making observations of your, well, you have been, obviously, but is there one aspect that impresses you most?
Well, the trouble is, once you live in a country, almost all the observations you make get absorbed somehow into your natural thinking. You adjust yourself to the way of life, and suddenly all your observations are part of you rather than something outside. And only the most naive and basic observations come to mind. Things like, it's just very convenient living in New York. I mean, you find places open at 2 o'clock in the morning where you can get groceries and that sort of thing, or buy a record, which is extraordinary in London. Travelling is more convenient than the whole set out of New York. Well, I'm talking about New York, of course, because I can hardly really talk about anywhere else not having lived here.
Well, we should perhaps mention, I think we can't let this pass, the nature, the political humor of Beyond the Fringe and the reception it's receiving in these days that are so filled with tension. There's a moral here somewhere, isn't there?
I'm not sure. It would be very comforting and flattering for us to say that we did this out of some missionary impulse,
I was thinking about that. No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean your impulse. I'm talking now about the phenomenon of this being so enthusiastically received at a time of such great tension.
Well, yes. I think probably people want... Well, their only alternative to laughing at the political situation is to get hysterical and shoot yourself. So, we find pleasure in satirizing the situation, ourselves. But in fact, at the back of it lies, the rather horrible menace of nuclear war and so forth. All the things that come up in our review with rather mad and, sort of careless abandon, the way in which civil defence is treated as a completely nonsensical, useless and farcical business. And, well, I mean, it is, there's no doubt about it. But one either admits it seriously or has a laugh.
And now this other point, as you say this, the fact is you are, without quotation marks about it, you are moralists. I mean, with a small m. You are four moral men, really.
Well, yes, I wouldn't like to comment on... Yeah, I suppose we are, in the vague sense of the word. Yeah.
In the good sense.
In the good sense. Not so much as... we're not... Shall we say we're not conscious about this so much. I mean, it just happens that civil defence, capital punishment appeal to us as subjects to satirize, not necessarily because we feel directly strongly about these subjects, although we do, but that's almost... It's combined with the desire to satirize as well. Unlike Lenny Bruce, who's more of a...
More outwardly
I mean, one could definitely say he's a moralist. I mean, the whole attitude of his act. When I saw him in London, I found myself not so much laughing, although now and again I was, on the floor with it, but gasping at what he was saying, and saying,
The
yeah,
truth,
yeah.
the truth.
Yeah, you know, just sort of...
Well, he was arrested for that truth, by the way, here in this very place
Yeah.
not too long ago.
Yeah, which is so ridiculous, you know. I mean, he did very well in London. He was excellently received at the establishment, and I believe he's going back there, which is good news.
He was well received in London.
Yes, he was, strangely enough. Although there were certain people who objected to his act, you know, because...
Have there been objections to Beyond the Fringe at any time?
Oh, yes.
We know there have been.
I mean, we get some fatuous letters now and again. People who don't understand. Some of the sketches, well, one of the sketches in particular, we do a sketch about the fact that Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller had a public school education, which means a private school over here, of course, and a rather sort of... It's a very aristocratic sort of conception. And Alan Bennett and I come from working class backgrounds, went to grammar schools, you know, mixed schools and that sort of thing. And we retort, Peter Cook says that about us, he says, of course, we had public school education, but Alan Bennett and Dudley Moore have come from working class families and have worked their way up, but I would like to say that Jonathan and I are working together with them in the cast and treating them as equals. To which Alan retorts, well, of course, I wonder how many people, we are working class, but wonder how many people realise that Jonathan Miller's a Jew. And I say, yes, well, he is a Jew, but one of the better sort. And he says, well, he said, I'd rather be working class than a Jew. And I said, oh, there's no comparison. But just think of the awful situation if you were working class and a Jew, you see. And he said, well, of course, there's always somebody worse off than yourself. But there's always some mad Jew or Jewish organisation that takes offence at this, you know, and says, you know, you're having a nasty stab at the Jews, which is exactly the opposite, you know. And you get blue-rinsed ladies sort of writing in saying...
blue-rinsed ladies?
Yes, yes. Loved your show, but strongly objected to the Jewish and sketch and the capital punishment, you know. They didn't want to see anything like that on the stage, you know, which is ridiculous. You know, they get the wrong end of the stick altogether. We do a sketch about a rock and roll vicar, you know, who's a very sort of very hearty man. He says, we start the sketch with a sort of a rock and roll song, you know, and he says, righto, boys, that's very good. That really had my feet tapping. Now let's get down to God. God, who is he? Where is he? Why is he? And above all, where is he? And where is he above all? Or something, I can't remember the exact words. And he goes on this, you know, ridiculous fashion, terribly hearty. Now, tell me, is there anything in the Bible that really puts you off religion? And we get everything mixed up and so forth. But it's, you know, it's a satire against the sort of parson that you meet in England who does try and promote religion by becoming one of the boys, you know.
You say that you meet in England, I think.
You meet over here. It's very funny. We've had a lot of American clergymen in the audience, very hip, very, you know, laughing raucously. It's a very strange feeling, you know. They're normally in the second row with white collars flashing, you know. But people do, I mean, people do get the wrong end of the stick sometimes, and it's very annoying.
Well, the nature of satire itself, the nature of you said earlier, you know, just as you satirize something musically, you have full knowledge of it, and so in satire, you turn the coin up, you flip the coin.
Well, of course, the thing is about music, I'm on a very easy ground here, because you can't really offend anybody by taking off Benjamin Britten. Except Benjamin Britten, he's the only one who can offend. But mine is all done out of goodwill, but a lot of satire is done out of sheer hatred, you know, and malice, which is inevitable, you know, but everything I satirize is through love of that. But, you know, the funny thing is that we're all becoming rather fond of the figures we're satirizing. I mean, Peter Cook, I mean, he does this Macmillan sketch, and he used to think Macmillan was really a rather ludicrous figure, but we've all grown to feel
identify with him.
Yes, you know, sort of feel him as rather a homely old boy and nice to have around, you know. And of course, Macmillan is now appearing on record as a pop singer, which is very funny. During a Conservative conference, he was describing the Labour Party's reaction to nuclear disarmament, the problem of nuclear disarmament, as very ambiguous. Saying, well, they didn't say yes, they didn't say no, saying all the time that Labour is dithering between its different sides as to what policy it should follow. And he sort of satirized this himself by singing an old song, and I can't remember the words, I'm ashamed to say, something like, she didn't say yes, she didn't say no, she wanted to stay, she was afraid to go, or something like that, ending up with, but she, what is it? I can't remember. Do you know the words of it?
No, I haven't.
She, oh goodness.
Joe Savage.
It's the diddly-da, and she stuck to the wall. Who? Jerome Kern. Is it really? Yeah. Anyway, he sings this song to the Conservative Party, or, sort of monotones it. He says, she didn't say yes, she didn't say no, she wanted to stay, she wanted to go, and it goes on in this. And they've done a marvellous thing in England of putting a rock and roll background to this. So it's sort of, she didn't say yes, da-da-da-da, she didn't say no, da-da-da-da, and it's a fantastic record, it's so funny. But we've all become rather fond of this, and it's becoming a bit ludicrous, sort of. But this is what happens to satire in England anyway, because you just get absorbed by the people you're satirizing.
Say, one point before I ask about your love of Lieder, too, from that Schubert. I know you admire Schubert very much, too.
Yes, well...
Before you do that, one point, you mentioned about British humor or satire. The Second City cast in London, when they went there, they were somewhat shocked. What they felt was the English audience's tendency to go more for what they call lavatory humor, not getting the subtleties of their performances. Do you feel this is justified?
No, not necessarily. Probably the appreciation of their humour was quieter than they had expected, but maybe this was because...
They were very well received until the night I saw them, very well. But they made this point, they were speaking of the general...
It might have been that the audience was trying to listen to what they were saying, having difficulty with the accent, just as a lot of American audiences over here have difficulty hearing our accent. When they complain, they say we were a little inaudible. In fact, I think what they mean is they can't understand the accent, and so that's probably why an audience in England is slightly quiet, subdued and listening when the Second City is performing. But the thing about lavatory humour, it's always been a thing in music halls all over the country. In England, lavatory humour is just laughed at very loudly and self-consciously because it's treated as a part of the English way of life to laugh at lavatories. And so when the word lavatory, if you want to be a success in a nightclub, say lavatory, and you'll get your first big laugh, But I don't think it means anything sociologically.
So it had no significance.
No, I think it's just a natural predilection of the Englishman for his lavatory. Yeah.
Why has the music hall gone? You mentioned music.
I don't know. I think with the rise of television and films, it's gradually died out. People have stayed at home, or they've gone to the movies to see a big film, and so forth.
Dudley Moore, we have to have a sequel. When you come back to Chicago again, I hope with Beyond the Fringe, but you're here for one day now, and I've taken about an hour and a half of your time, and you're hungry, and the waitresses have to come in. We should point out we're at the Gate of Horn the Sunday night, and all this week, Oscar Brown Jr. and not only Oscar Brown, but a very marvelous comic team of Greco and Willard, whose humor is very original. By the way, you may be seeing them tonight.
Yes,
seeing Oscar Brown tonight. It's an excellent bill. But if we have this plug. Now, this is just...
Well, I'm looking forward to it very much. I've heard such a lot from Barbara Siegel about the...
Dudley, I think aside from Oscar Brown Jr., or Greco and Willard and Beyond the Fringe, there is Franz Schubert.
There is, indeed. Well, this song, which I must say, if I can just say briefly, if it doesn't come off when I do it, I'm not trying to inspire the audience into reckless laughter, but if it doesn't come off when I'm doing it in the show, I feel very embarrassed because it's really a music hall turn, in many ways. although it's accurate musically, if I can say it myself. It has, you know, it has a flavour of the music hall about it. But anyway, I won't excuse it anymore. It's a sort of a takeoff of the Earl King, sung by a bass and soprano.
Oh, I think Dudley Moore with this magnificent performance of it's a song of the Flabbergast.
It's called Die Flabbergast.
Die Flabbergast.
Yes.
Dudley Moore, artist, very funny man, but more than that, I think someone who understands so many things well. And to be seen, what theatre is that in New York?
The Golden Theatre.
At the Golden Theatre with his 3 colleagues and Beyond the Fringe, and to be heard on records to Phillips?
Capitol Records.
Capitol.
Well, there's an English recording, Parlophone, but I don't know if it's over here.
There's Capitol here, then. There are 2 albums, aren't there? Isn't there a new one?
Yes. You should get both, of course, ladies and gentlemen, because one contains items that aren't to be had on the other. The Capitol recording has, you know, certain items like the Shakespeare sketch about the war and others that don't appear on English. But they're very good buys, both of them.
Dudley Moore, amen to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.